From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, November 29. Dementia is on track to become Australia's leading cause of death, overtaking cancer. It's not just a young person's disease. And there are steps you can take now to reduce your risk. One of them is drinking less, because alcohol-related dementia, including in young people, is a real risk. Today, the inspiring love story of one couple who faced a diagnosis that was hard to comprehend. Late summer at Bondi, the perfect place to fall in love. Louise Bryant was a media executive in her 30s, a volunteer lifesaver who'd spent the season on patrol, keeping the kids and the backpackers safe at the world's most famous beach. Her patrol captain invited the crew to the clubhouse at the beach's south end, Icebergs. There's a famous aquamarine ocean pool, and it was their end-of-season celebration. And then someone walked in who would change Louise's life. The tall, handsome, drop-dead charming Craig Moore. He was an advertising copywriter, a charming wordsmith, and a huge personality. His nickname was Moose. Everyone at the table seemed to know Moose, but his attention settled on Lou, and before she knew it, she was swept up in a whirl of dinners and dates.
I guess you could say we instantly fell in love. He's very, very charismatic, a bit of a bon vivant sort of character. He's incredibly witty and very funny, and he just had a real knack with being able to solve a kind of client problem, I guess, in a creative advertising setting. But he was also an avid letter writer to the Sydney Morning Herald in particular, and he wrote some very funny letters that were published every other week. He'd often write me beautiful cards and letters, which I've of course still kept, but yeah, very special.
And over the years, you started to notice some changes in his behaviour. Looking back now, what was the first thing that made you aware that something was different?
Look, I think it was a lot of just unusual sort of behaviour that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He seemed to genuinely love me. He was very caring and kind. He was very supportive, but in the next breath, he wouldn't turn up to things. He would become a little bit erratic. Some of his friends would often say things to me that were concerning. And yeah, I think there were many moments where I look back and think, oh, okay, that makes sense now. That makes sense.
Yeah, you describe in a story that we're publishing in The Australian today a moment where he was supposed to do a big ocean swim and he didn't finish with the rest of the swimmers. That must have sent you into a panic.
Absolutely. I remember it so vividly. It was the Palm Beach to Whale Beach swim. It was a sparkling day. The conditions were perfect. We'd made a weekend out of it. We'd stayed at friends the night before. I remember dropping him down to the marshalling area, and I said to him, I'll meet you at the other end. And an hour later, he hadn't emerged from the water, and his friends and everyone in his age group had obviously arrived, and I started to sort of make some inquiries. Had anyone seen Moose? And eventually I looked down and I could see him wandering up the beach, and he hadn't been in the water. And I think I was a bit shocked and taken aback by that. I thought, that's really strange. And he then said, oh, my goggles broke, which in ocean swimming circles is a big, like, it's just the worst excuse. And I think a friend overheard, and she turned on her heel and said, you're so full of shit, Moose. And it was, yeah, it was a quite sort of troubled me, but we moved on from that point, and I just thought, okay. He was able to atone about a year later, and he did eventually do another ocean swim over at Manly, and he loved it. But now, of course, he's completely terrified of open water, and he won't go anywhere near a pool or indeed the ocean or the beach. He gets quite anxious. Something was, in fact, seriously wrong. But it was something Lou and Craig couldn't have even imagined at that point. They were in midlife, fit and active. Craig had young onset dementia, alcohol-induced dementia, something Lou didn't even know was possible. In Australia, it's hard to find a man who hasn't at some point in their lives drunk a lot of alcohol, whether it's weekend partying or the steady, quiet chug of drinks after work, with dinner, catching up with friends. The kind of always-on consumption that seems okay day to day, but
can look quite confronting when you write down the number of standard drinks in one of those forms at the GP. After Craig's diagnosis, he and Lou carried on with their life in beautiful Bondi, enjoying the good times, trying not to think too much about what the future might hold.
He was in hospital recovering from an unrelated surgery and he started talking to others about what was going on in your life that wasn't quite right. What was he saying?
Well, there was a moment where he was suffering this delirium, I suppose, but I remember at one point he had streams of visitors coming in, and we had some incredible support in that time because we weren't really sure what was going on. And many friends would come in and he'd tell them, and he looked so serene and happy that we were having a baby, Melanie Moore, a baby girl, and he was very happy about that. And
so he named this baby that wasn't real.
Yeah.
And in that moment, do you remember how you felt about that? I mean, that's a moment where you can't really pretend that nothing is wrong.
Yeah, look, sometimes you need to look for the humour in the dark moments. I was literally running down the corridor telling friends, look, please don't ring your wife to tell them this wonderful news, because it's actually not the case.
While all this was going on, Louise was managing editor of The Australian, a huge job. She wasn't sharing much of what was going on in her personal life, but at the time we were making a podcast, Head Noise, all about degenerative brain conditions. In Head Noise, we followed a superstar retired rugby league player, James Graham, as he explored what years of football had done to his brain. And we heard his neurologist, Dr. Rowena Mobbs, telling James his scans showed a reduction in volume of his brain that shouldn't be happening in someone so young. That podcast prompted Lou to go and see Dr. Mobbs with Craig, because Lou wondered if head knocks Craig suffered while playing American football could have contributed to his condition. Eventually, Dr. Mobbs said Craig needed to go into full-time care. Now he lives, safe and happy, in a group home where Lou knows he's getting the care he needs.
When you're talking about a dementia diagnosis, there's often no start and end. Rowena describes it like a rolling ball. I prefer to describe it like throwing a ball off a cliff, because you don't know where it's going to land.
One of the factors Lou and Craig were dealing with was the shame associated with dementia. It's not easy for anyone to talk about the loss of dignity and privacy, the loss of independence and connection that any kind of dementia causes.
I'd love to one day talk about dementia positivity, but there really isn't now, because there's no cure, there's no happy story, there's no surgery, there's no magic pill at the moment, and it's something that I think we really need to start thinking about, shifting our attention to dementia as an important area that's becoming more and more urgent, particularly, and I'm sure you're aware of the statistics, but it will overtake cancer as the leading cause of death next year in Australia, and cases are expected to triple by 2050 in the Western Asia region, of which Australia is of course part of. So it's going to have a significant impact on us, and I think we need to start talking about various ways we can prevent or intervene.
The world's preeminent medical journal, The Lancet, has a standing commission on dementia prevention, intervention and care. Its 2024 report talks about increasing and stronger evidence about the factors that can help reduce the risk. Those are things like improving education, preventing hearing loss, preventing high blood pressure, reducing smoking and obesity, and preventing excessive alcohol consumption. The Lancet's report suggests that means consuming fewer than 2 glasses of wine or beers a day to avoid increasing your risk of dementia.
What do you wish you could say to yourself of 10 years ago, or wish that you had known if awareness had been greater then?
Maybe it's just my experience, but I just wonder if when we go to the GP and if those issues are raised, often that conversation leads down the path of cancer risk or heart risk or diabetes, but very rarely in those early stages is dementia thought of. And I think that's because a lot of people assume that dementia is an old person's disease, which of course it isn't.
Also, when you're talking to your GP about modifiable behaviour, the GP's saying you should really give up smoking, or maybe you should eat a bit less, try and lose a bit of weight or do more exercise. The reasons to do those things feel like they're a long way off, don't they? It's you could live longer if you eat better now. That can feel quite intangible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the more we can raise awareness, it is an urgent conversation, and I think we need to collectively think about how we can adjust our thinking, I guess, around the fact that dementia is a significant risk factor.
After the break, Lou's message to others who are touched by dementia. Louise's story is told in The Australian today by one of the Australian's most gifted writers, Fiona Harari. You can read it right now at theaustralian.com.au. And we'll be back after this break.
You and I have been friends for years, and you've been very supportive to me as I watched my mother go through the diagnosis of dementia, and you've listened patiently to me talking about that a lot. You didn't talk much about your own situation. You would allude to it in passing, but this is the first time we've really talked about it in detail. What made the difference for you? Why do you want to talk about it now?
I received it was actually a video of Craig Moose standing at a kitchen bench in his care home, and he was struggling to write his name. And even though it was a beautiful video and it was sent with the right intent, it was heartbreaking for me, because I realised then that this insidious disease had robbed him of his skills that he was so good at. So,
yeah, it must have been a moment of just pure empathy for you, of feeling that this beautiful man who you have made sure is happy and safe was not who he used to be.
Yeah.
It's our cohort who will have to face dementia as we get older. This is clearly something that's coming for us. But we're also the carers, whether we're caring for elderly parents or our partners who are going through this. What would you say to other people who are caring for someone either who has a diagnosis or who is concerned about their partner or someone they love?
I think it's absolutely to get to look after yourself, to ensure that you have support around you. It's not often you feel like it is a one-person job. You feel very alone. You're very vulnerable, but it's really important that you are reaching out to get support. I chose to be very private about it and only have a very small select network of very close friends and my family who really provided that level of support, which was wonderful. But yeah, I guess you just need to make sure you have support around you.
Yeah, not be ashamed.
No, not at all.
Louise, thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire.
Louise Bryant's story is in The Australian and at theaustralian.com.au right now.